What if humanity was never the first to rule this planet, but only the survivors of something far greater? Long before the first pyramids rose from the desert, before Sumer's kings carved their names into clay, the earth may have belonged to another kind of being. They were called the Nephilim, giants born of heaven and earth, the offspring of divine visitors and mortal women. Their hands shaped stone cities that no tool could cut. Their voices commanded nations that had no name, and their hunger, both for power and flesh, darkened the sky of the ancient world. Across every civilization, from the Bible to Sumer, from the Andes to Egypt, the same story whispers through the ruins. An age of giants, wiped away by a flood that reset the world. But what if that age never truly ended? Because some say the blood of the Nephilim still flows in us. Join us tonight as we descend into a forgotten chapter of Earth's history, where myth meets archaeology, and where the boundaries between gods and men blur once more. Welcome to What If the Nephilim Once Ruled the Earth? The world before the flood does not feel like our own. It moves slower, breathes heavier, a vast twilight suspended between geology and myth. The continents are still shifting after the last ice age. Glaciers glimmer along the northern rim, and the air is thick with humidity. Lightning veins pulsing through the clouds, as if the sky itself remembers a different order of beings. Forests stretch where deserts now lie, and the coastlines of our present world are still dry plains where great rivers carve their ancient paths. It is within this humid cradle of storms that the first human temples rise, not of brick, but of monoliths carved with impossible precision. And among them, the stories say, walked the Nephilim, giants born of heaven and earth, the hybrid offspring of the Watchers and the daughters of men. They do not merely tower above humanity, they rule it, bending creation to their will. Their shadows stretch across the ages, shaping our myths, our fears, and perhaps even the bones of our forgotten monuments. The Book of Genesis offers only a whisper of this epoch. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men. It is a single verse, brief and cryptic, but behind it hides an entire lost history, one of rebellion, corruption, and cosmic law broken. Other ancient writings, the Book of Enoch, Jubilees, and Jasher, fill in what Genesis omits, a world visited by luminous beings, the Watchers, who descended to teach humanity the secrets of heaven. They revealed metallurgy, enchantment, astronomy, gifts that promised wisdom but delivered ruin. And their children, the Nephilim, grew vast and violent. The earth cried out, says Enoch, and its blood reached unto heaven. A civilization of divine knowledge and monstrous appetite could not last. The myths remember its end as sudden and absolute, a cleansing by water. Across civilizations, the pattern remains eerily consistent. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of a flood sent to erase the heroes of old, the demigods whose pride defied heaven. In Greece, Zeus drowns the Bronze Age race of giants who forgot the gods, Dakti. In Mesoamerica, the Popol Vuh describes a generation of wooden men who spoke without souls, destroyed by the deluge. And in Hindu texts, the god Vishnu warns Manu of rising waters meant to wash away the corrupted age. Different names, same memory, an age of power undone by its own excess. Science, careful yet curious, offers its own reflections. In Greenland, ice cores preserve a chemical scar, a layer rich in soot, carbon spherules, and platinum, dating back roughly 12,900 years. Geologists call it the Younger Dryas boundary layer. It marks the abrupt end of the Pleistocene, when temperatures spiked, glaciers melted, and sea levels surged. The cause remains debated. Perhaps a comet impact, perhaps solar activity, perhaps both. But to the people who lived through it, there was no science to explain it, only sky fire, black rain, and the relentless roar of rising seas. We call it Meltwater Pulse 1A. The ancients called it the Flood. Perhaps they were describing the same event in two different languages, one written in myth, the other in sediment. If this was the Flood, then the world that preceded it, the world of the Nephilim, must have been extraordinary. Imagine cities older than memory, built from stones so vast that even modern machines would struggle to move them. At Baalbek, the trilithon stones each weigh over 1,000 tons, yet they were placed with precision that defies our best cranes. At Göbekli Tepe, in modern-day Turkey, 12-ton pillars carved with lions, serpents, and vultures form perfect astronomical alignments, thousands of years before agriculture or writing. The builders of that sanctuary vanished, burying their temple beneath the soil as if to protect it from what was coming. In the Andes, at Pumapunku, stones cut with micrometer accuracy lie scattered as if struck by a cataclysmic force. Across the planet, monuments whisper the same message. There was an age of mastery before the known world began. Could these be the remnants of the antediluvian age, the civilization of the giants? Archaeologists explain them as feats of human labour, but the myths insist otherwise. They were built by those whose stride was like the cedar, whose breath moved mountains. If not literal, then symbolic, a memory of beings whose scale, physical or intellectual, surpassed mankind's. And yet, even in ruin, their presence feels uneasy. What kind of world was this, where gods and mortals shared the same cities, where knowledge could be both sacred and lethal? Perhaps that is why so many cultures record not nostalgia, but warning. The Book of Jubilees says, "All flesh corrupted its way upon the earth." Civilization had advanced beyond its soul. Modern science may not confirm their existence, but it confirms their ending. Sediment layers reveal tsunamis of unimaginable force. Fossil beds show mass extinction compressed into a geological instant. Whatever happened, it was global, abrupt, and final. The flood was not a metaphor, it was a memory. Before the giants came, there were the Watchers. The Book of Enoch describes them not as demons, but as radiant beings, shining ones who descended upon Mount Hermon in the ancient land of Bashan. 200 of them, led by Semjaza, swore an oath to take for themselves wives among the daughters of men. Their descent was not silent. The ancients said the sky opened in light and thunder, and that their names, Semjaza, Amaros, Azazel, were once spoken as constellations. Their coming was a miracle and a betrayal, for it broke the oldest law in the universe, the separation between heaven and earth. From that union came the Nephilim, the hybrids of heaven's intellect and human flesh. They were said to be radiant and terrible, born with memories of the stars, yet driven by hunger of the flesh. They were not meant to exist, and their existence tilted the balance of creation itself. In Mesopotamia, the same story is told under different names. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens to the earth. They too descended to teach humanity agriculture, mathematics, the calendar, the secrets of the stars. The god Enki is said to have given men the Me, tablets of divine knowledge that governed civilization itself. But behind these gifts lay a cost: obedience. The Anunnaki, like the Watchers, ruled as teachers and kings. Humanity, newly awakened, found itself kneeling to its instructors. Across every early culture, the pattern repeats. Knowledge descends from the sky, mortality merges with the divine, and something vast is lost in the exchange. Archaeologists studying the earlier Sumerian and Proto-Egyptian cities, Eridu, Uruk, Abydos, note a startling leap. Small scattered farming villages suddenly become organized civilizations with written language, monumental architecture, metallurgy, and astronomy. There is no slow gradient, no transitional phase. It is as if, overnight, a torch was lit in the dark. Civilization did not evolve, it appeared. Could this be what the ancients meant by the Watcher's instruction? In the Book of Enoch, they taught mankind metallurgy, enchantment, astrology, and the cutting of roots. To modern ears, these sound like primitive crafts, but each one is double-edged. Metallurgy brings weapons, enchantment is manipulation, astrology is control over destiny. They gave us knowledge, yes, but not wisdom. And that imbalance would define every civilization that followed. The Canaanite tablets of Ugarit offer another name, Elohim, a divine council, not one god but many. Among them were just rulers and rebels, beings whose arrogance drove them to interfere in mortal affairs. In later Hebrew tradition, these fallen ones were cast down, punished for revealing the secrets of heaven. They became the Watchers, eternally bound to the earth. The myth is not only about punishment, it is about boundaries. Between creation and creator, power and restraint, knowledge and hubris. Some scholars and mythographers suggest these stories encode a memory of real contact, perhaps not with angels, but with a vanished elite, a people so advanced that early humanity mistook them for gods. Their influence might explain the sudden rise of agriculture, metallurgy, and monumental architecture around 10,000 BCE. If civilization was a flame, perhaps the Watchers were the spark. Their names echo through time. Semjaza, the leader who swore the oath on Hermon's heights, Amaros, the cursed one, and Azazel, who taught men to forge blades and women to adorn their faces with paint. War and seduction, the twin forces that would shape all human history. Azazel, the texts say, became the symbol of corruption itself. During Yom Kippur, the Hebrews sent a scapegoat into the wilderness bearing his name, a ritual remembrance of guilt passed down from heaven. If the Watchers shaped us through war and desire, do you think their shadow still lingers? Like if you believe it, and comment what you think they left behind. If we strip the myth of its theology and read it as encoded memory, what remains? A story of beings descending with knowledge far beyond human comprehension. Perhaps not gods, but survivors, travellers from a forgotten world, luminous in the eyes of primitive humanity. To early minds there was no vocabulary for advanced. There was only divine. And if the offspring of these unions, the Nephilim, inherited both intellect and appetite, then their birth was not a blessing, but an imbalance. They were beings of immense potential without moral restraint. The arrival of knowledge without wisdom turned paradise into laboratory and earth into battleground. The ancients described it not as an evolution, but as a fall, the descent of heaven's order into earthly chaos. In the modern world, remnants of their presence linger in stone. High on Mount Hermon, archaeologists have uncovered basalt sanctuaries and circular altars carved with stellar alignments. Many are oriented toward the constellation of Orion, a celestial marker shared by monuments in Egypt, Mexico, and Peru. Coincidence or memory encoded in architecture? Perhaps both. If the Watchers truly walked the earth, their legacy would not have vanished with them. It would have fused into the foundations of civilization, into the myths that birthed religion, the sciences that shaped empires, the human desire to reach back toward the sky. Their rebellion, as described in Enoch, was not just against heaven, but against the flow of time itself, an attempt to create permanence in a world designed to decay. And so their story becomes our reflection. Every act of discovery carries their echo. Every technological leap is a reenactment of the Watcher's descent, a new crossing of forbidden thresholds. Imagine standing on an ancient plain where the soil trembles beneath your feet, not from thunder, but from footsteps. Each tremor rolls through the ground like a heartbeat, deep, deliberate, inhuman. You look toward the horizon, and what you first mistake for mountains begin to move. The age of giants has begun. The Book of Enoch describes the Nephilim as beings of impossible scale, devouring everything the earth could yield. They consumed all the acquisitions of men, it says, and when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. It is a passage of horror, but also a metaphor for imbalance, a world ruled by appetite, not harmony. Archaeologists in the modern world find echoes of this imbalance carved into stone. At Baalbek in Lebanon, the Temple of Jupiter stands on a foundation of blocks, weighing more than 800 tons each. No quarry road, no tool marks, no written record explains how such masses were moved. The same mystery repeats at Sacsayhuaman in Peru, where stones fit so tightly together that even a razor blade cannot slip between them. And at Pumapunku in Bolivia, precision-cut blocks lie scattered like the remnants of a forgotten machine, as if some vast hand had rearranged the earth and then disappeared. To mainstream archaeology, these are feats of human ingenuity. To those who read myth as memory, they are the fingerprints of giants. A scale of construction suited not for men, but for beings whose stride could cross valleys. In the Hebrew tradition, some Nephilim became rulers. The Anakim, the Rephaim, the mighty men of old. Their cities, the texts say, had walls reaching up to heaven. Even after the flood, when Moses' scouts entered Canaan, they returned trembling. We saw the Nephilim there, and we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. These were not metaphors of courage, they were admissions of awe. Mythologies elsewhere preserve similar proportions. The Greeks called them Titans. In Ireland, they were the Fomorians, sea-born giants who enslaved humanity until the gods intervened. In the Andes, the first beings were said to be so tall that they could drink from rivers without bending. Across continents, the memory repeats. Before man's reign came a generation too large for the earth. If we walk through the ruins of these civilizations with that memory in mind, the landscape changes. Doorways appear too tall, staircases too deep, sarcophagi too large for human remains. We begin to wonder, were these monuments built for the gods or by them? Modern engineers calculate that to move a 1,200-ton stone from quarry to temple, a workforce of tens of thousands would be required, operating with technology we still cannot replicate efficiently. Yet the ancients attribute the work to those of great stature, to builders before the flood. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero himself is described as 2/3 divine, 1/3 human, a descendant of these hybrid bloodlines. He searches for immortality among the ruins left by his ancestors, ruins that still stand today in the plains of Mesopotamia. The question arises, did the Nephilim truly shape these places, or did humanity merely mimic them, building on a scale that recalled its lost masters? Perhaps both are true. The presence of the giants might have imprinted a psychological template, a yearning to build larger, higher, closer to the heavens. Our ziggurats, pyramids, cathedrals, all may be architectural echoes of a time when greatness was measured against beings who touched the sky. In the fossil record, there are occasional anomalies, bones too long, skulls too massive, footprints pressed into strata millions of years old. Most are dismissed as errors or hoaxes, but their persistence is telling. Across the 19th and early 20th centuries, newspapers reported dozens of giant skeletons unearthed in North America. Most later vanished into private collections or museum basements. Perhaps they were fakes. But the pattern mirrors something older, evidence that rises briefly into view, then sinks again into the earth, as if the ground itself guards a memory it is unwilling to release. To live in that world, the world of the Nephilim, would mean existing at the mercy of gods who looked upon men as insects. Yet curiously, early myth doesn't describe humanity only as victims. Some humans served them, learned from them, even revered them. It was a paradoxical coexistence, awe and terror intertwined. And maybe that paradox still lives in us, the instinct to kneel before power, even when we know it will consume us. The great heresy of the Watchers was not only that they mated with mortals, but that they taught them. In the Book of Enoch, it is written, Azazel taught men to make swords and knives, and shields and breastplates. Semjaza taught enchantments, and Barachiel taught astrology. In the myth, this is how civilization begins, through revelation from beings who should never have interfered. But what is civilization when it arrives too soon? Imagine a Stone Age village watching the sky flare open as metal burns through the clouds. Imagine the first forge fire glowing not from discovery, but from instruction. That is how the Age of Giants might have felt. Not progress, but invasion. Archaeologists trace the rise of metallurgy, writing, and temple culture to the Fertile Crescent around 4000 BCE. Yet the myths insist it was older, much older, carried over from a world before the flood. The Sumerians say the god Enki gave mankind the Me, tablets of divine law and technology. The Greeks recall Prometheus stealing fire from the heavens. The Hebrews tell of the Watchers revealing the cutting of roots, the power of enchantment. Different tongues, one story, forbidden knowledge descending from above. At first it must have seemed like salvation. Fire tamed the night, copper and bronze shaped tools, stars became maps. But every gift carried a mirror image: warfare, vanity, control. Weapons ended tribal innocence, cosmetics birthed desire and jealousy. Astrology replaced wonder with prediction. Humanity learned to command the world, but forgot how to belong to it. There are ruins that seem to remember that first corruption. At Göbekli Tepe, 12-ton pillars rise in concentric circles, carved with vultures and headless men, a warning, not a celebration. At Tiahuanaco, the Gate of the Sun bears reliefs of hybrid beings with winged crowns, their eyes like stars. The oldest myths of these regions speak of teachers from the sky who arrived before the flood, great ones who walked as men but shone as the sun. When their presence vanished, the people buried their temples beneath earth, perhaps to seal away what had gone wrong. Some modern researchers read these tales as allegory for a lost scientific culture, an Atlantis that mastered forces beyond control. Others see psychological truth, that knowledge unbalanced by wisdom breeds self-destruction. Either way, the moral stands: enlightenment without ethics is merely a slower form of ruin. The Watchers may have seen humanity as children needing guidance. The Nephilim, their offspring, inherited neither compassion nor restraint. As their strength grew, so did their hunger. Resources drained, crops trampled, humans hunted. The world tilted toward violence, a laboratory that had escaped its creators. And the creators, unable to undo what they had set in motion, watched the earth descend into chaos. Perhaps that is why so many myths end the same way, with gods or higher powers deciding that the experiment must be erased. In Hindu texts, Vishnu descends to cleanse the world when demons corrupt it. In Greek myth, Zeus sends a flood to drown the men of the Bronze Age. In the Hebrew account, the Lord grieves that he made mankind at all. Different pantheons, one verdict: reset the earth. If the Watchers' legacy truly survives, it might not be in their bloodlines, but in their idea that knowledge is power, and power justifies its own pursuit. Every age of discovery risks becoming another fall. From the alchemists seeking immortality to the engineers splitting the atom, the same pattern repeats: gifts from heaven that can either illuminate or annihilate. And perhaps that is the real meaning of the Nephilim story. Not giants of flesh, but giants of ambition, a warning carved into the mythic memory of our species, that what descends from the sky can lift us or burn us. Somewhere, buried beneath the ruins of early temples, there may still lie tablets of stone inscribed with symbols no one has yet read, relics of that first transmission. If we ever uncover them, will we recognize the language as divine? Or will we realize it was ours all along, the echo of a lesson forgotten, now repeating itself once more? Across the world's oldest texts, the same memory surfaces. A war between heaven and earth, between gods and giants, between order and chaos. It is not a single story, but a convergence of stories, like the rivers of myth that all flow toward the same sea. In the Hebrew Book of Enoch, the archangels are sent to punish the Watchers and their monstrous offspring. Gabriel strikes the Nephilim with famine. Michael binds the rebellious angels in valleys of the earth until the day of judgment. The giants devour one another when food runs out, and their spirits, half divine and half mortal, become the wandering demons of later ages. It is the first recorded apocalypse, not fire or flood, but purification by conflict. In Greece, the same pattern takes form as the Titanomachy. Zeus and his kin overthrow the Titans, the elder gods who once ruled heaven. The Titans are cast into Tartarus, a deep abyss, bound by chains of lightning. In the Norse sagas, Odin and his sons battle the Jötnar, frost giants born from the void. In Mesopotamia, the storm god Marduk slays the serpent Tiamat, whose monstrous children had challenged the divine order. In each culture, the story is the same melody in a different key. A rebellion of primordial beings and a cosmic reset. Could these myths be distant echoes of one historical memory, an ancient uprising that ended the age of giants? Perhaps not a literal war of angels, but a violent end to an earlier civilization that humanity could only describe in divine terms. Archaeologists speak of layers of destruction that appear mysteriously across the ancient world: burned cities, melted stone, vitrified forts, black glass, fused by temperatures no ancient fire could reach. Some date to around 12,000 years ago, the very boundary of the Younger Dryas, when the planet suffered sudden cataclysm. If nature itself turned against the giants, myth might remember that chaos as divine retribution. In these myths, the conflict is never just physical, it is moral. The giants are punished not for their size, but for their arrogance. They blur the line between creator and created, and in doing so, they unmake the balance of the cosmos. The gods do not destroy them out of hatred, but necessity. The world must be cleansed before it collapses. Each flood, each fire, each chain cast into the underworld is a line drawn between what can exist and what must not. Some of the defeated survive. In Greek myth, Atlas is condemned to hold up the heavens. In Hebrew lore, Og of Bashan, the last of the Rephaim, escapes the flood by clinging to the ark's roof. Even in Ireland, the last of the Fomorians interbreed with mortals, seeding later dynasties. The victors erase their names, but their blood lingers, diluted, hidden, sleeping. The war ends, but its echoes run through every human lineage that dares to defy heaven again. When thunder shakes the horizon, we are told it is only weather. But ancient people heard it differently, as the sky remembering its last battle. The mountains, too, bear scars that seem to remember impact. Peaks split, valleys burned, as if the planet itself once took sides. Modern science calls them craters. The ancients called them judgment, and perhaps both are true. If a comet did fall at the end of the Pleistocene, igniting the fires that ended the giants' reign, it might explain why so many flood myths begin with light from the heavens. Not rain first, but a flash. Not punishment alone, but cleansing fire followed by water. The end of an epoch so absolute that only fragments of its story survived, disguised as divine war. But every war, however cosmic, leaves survivors. And as the waters begin to rise, the surviving Nephilim and their human followers turn their gaze toward the mountains. There, at the edge of annihilation, they build their final refuges, megalithic strongholds that still crown the world's peaks. The gods may have won, but the giants had not yet vanished. They were only waiting for the storm to pass. The sky breaks open like a wound. The first drops fall softly, then endlessly, and soon the sound becomes unbearable, a roar that drowns even thought. The flood has begun. To later generations it is myth, but to those who lived through it, it was the end of the world, a reset written in water. Across every ancient culture, the same story rises from the deep. In Genesis, the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of heaven were opened. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods weep as they watch their creation perish. In Hindu lore, Vishnu warns Manu to build an ark before the deluge. The Maya speak of the gods destroying a previous race of men who had forgotten how to worship. China remembers Nuwa melting stones to repair the shattered heavens after the flood. Different tongues, one memory. A cleansing of the earth when its balance was lost. What caused it? For centuries, theologians debated divine wrath. Today, geologists and climatologists find traces of a physical event no less devastating. In Greenland's ice cores and ocean sediments, a sharp spike in meltwater appears roughly 12,900 years ago. Meltwater pulse 1A. At the same time, the planet cools abruptly for over a millennium. The Younger Dryas, possibly triggered by a comet striking the Laurentide ice sheet. Across North America and Europe, mammoths vanish, forests burn, rainfall becomes torrential. The world's coastlines redraw themselves overnight. To an ancient eye, the sky itself had turned against the earth, and if that earth was already ruled by hybrid beings, Nephilim, whose violence had corrupted creation, the flood becomes more than a natural disaster. It becomes a divine act of rebalancing. The Book of Enoch describes it as a cosmic judgment. The earth has cried out, "Cleanse it from the giants who have corrupted all flesh." It is not just the humans who perish, but their false kings, the titans of blood and flame, the offspring of forbidden unions. In this interpretation, the flood is less about punishment than mercy, a chance to restore the harmony that the Watchers had broken, but survival stories remain. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim builds an ark under the god Ea's secret command. In the Hebrew version, Noah obeys Yahweh and saves the seed of life. In each, one family escapes, and with them the memory of what was lost. The deluge erases cities, temples, and the monuments of the giants, but not entirely. When the waters recede, fragments of that world remain. Megaliths half buried in mud, myths whispering of builders before the flood. From a geological standpoint, the evidence aligns eerily well. Sea levels rose more than 120 metres, submerging vast coastal plains. Off India's Gulf of Cambay, sonar has mapped underwater structures older than any known city. In the Caribbean, the ruins of Yonaguni rise like terraces beneath the sea. And around the Mediterranean, submerged shorelines trace a catastrophe remembered in legend, but forgotten by history. If these are the footprints of that vanished world, then the flood was not simply an ending. It was a veil drawn over memory. Every story of creation after the deluge begins the same way, and the world was made anew. But a new world always carries ghosts of the old. In the Near East, traditions of post-flood survival linger in strange genealogies. The sons of Noah are said to repopulate the earth, yet among their descendants appear names that echo pre-flood bloodlines. Anak, Og, Bashan. The giants return. How? The text is silent, but the implication is clear. Not all of them perished. Some blood somewhere endured. Imagine the survivors climbing the mountains as the flood waters rise, watching their cities dissolve beneath them, their towers swallowed whole. They were once the masters of the earth. Now they cling to cliffs, half divine and fully desperate, cursing the heavens that once gave them power. When the rains finally cease, they descend again to a new and silent world, one stripped of their dominion, but still haunted by their memory. The flood, then, is both an extinction and a concealment. It drowns not only a species, but a story. Yet the mud it left behind still holds bones too large, stones too perfect, myths too consistent to ignore, and beneath those layers of silt, something stirs. The rumour that the giants, or what they represented, survived in forms we have yet to recognise. When the flood ended, the world did not return to innocence. The rivers had changed their courses, mountains had been sheared into islands, and the shorelines of every continent were different. But more haunting than the new geography was what the survivors found when the waters withdrew. Ruins too large to have been built by human hands, and legends that refused to die. The Book of Numbers contains a single unsettling line. "We saw the Nephilim there." The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. This is written after the flood. If the deluge was meant to erase the hybrid race, it failed. The giants had returned, or perhaps they had never truly vanished. In the ancient Levant, the tribes of Canaan spoke of the Rephaim and the Anakim, tall beings who ruled fortified cities before Israel's conquest. The Amorites described them as men whose height was like the cedars. One, named Og of Bashan, was said to have slept in an iron bed more than 13 feet long. His kingdom, Bashan, lies near Mount Hermon, the same place where the Watchers first descended. Geography becomes prophecy. The mountain that birthed them also became their last refuge. Far beyond the Bible's horizon, similar remnants appear. In the high deserts of Peru, oral histories tell of the Huari giants, builders of the first cities, who were wiped out by a flood of fire. In North America, the Paiute people recount the Site-Ka, red-haired cannibal giants who lived in caves before being burned alive by the tribes that overthrew them. In Ireland, the mythic Fomorians survived the drowning of their homeland and intermarried with the Tuatha De Danann, seeding royal bloodlines. In every version, the pattern repeats. The giants fall, retreat, and then hide among men. Archaeologists, too, stumble across their shadows. Burial mounds in the Ohio Valley once yielded enormous skeletons, some 8 or 9 feet tall, often buried with copper ornaments and double rows of teeth. In Sardinia, local farmers unearthed elongated skulls and bones far larger than human proportion. In Ecuador and the Caucasus, legends of colossal graves persist, and occasional bones surface before being quietly removed by authorities. Mainstream science attributes these to mismeasurements or folklore, but the recurrence across continents suggests something older, not proof, but persistence. Perhaps the Nephilim did not survive as a race, but as a strain diffused through the human population. The Sumerians believed that kingship descended from heaven, that rulers were descendants of the gods. Egypt's pharaohs claimed divine parentage, so did the emperors of China and Japan. Even today, royal genealogies obsess over pure bloodlines. These are echoes of a time when divine blood was a literal inheritance, a lingering thread of the forbidden line. Geneticists speak of ghost populations, ancient groups whose DNA appears in modern genomes though their bodies are gone. Among modern humans, traces of unknown hominins appear, not Neanderthal, not Denisovan, something else. Could these spectral genes be the biological memory of the Nephilim myth, a hybrid ancestry so deeply buried it survives only in code? Science does not name it that way, but myth often cloaks truth in story. It remembers what data forgets. As early civilizations rose again after the flood, they rebuilt not from scratch, but from memory. Ziggurats rose over Mesopotamia, mirroring mountains once inhabited by gods. Megalithic temples on Malta and Sardinia followed the same star alignments as vanished pre-flood sites. It was as if humanity, carrying the memory of its conquerors, unconsciously rebuilt their world, smaller, humbler, but patterned after the blueprints of the giants. And perhaps the most subtle survival is psychological. The myth of superiority, of rulers closer to the divine, becomes the foundation of hierarchy itself. We inherit not only their blood but their idea, that power descends from above, that some are born to rule and others to serve. In that sense, the Nephilim never left us. They became our archetype of domination, kings, demigods, conquerors, human in form but driven by something older. The further we move from the flood, the quieter the voices of the giants become. Their echoes fade from the tongues of men, but not from the earth itself. They linger in stone, in myth, and perhaps even in the spiral code of our own blood. Every civilization that rose after the deluge carried fragments of their memory, tales of godlike builders, colossal ruins, and bloodlines that claimed descent from heaven. The world forgot their names, but not their presence. In archives and museum basements, fragments of strange discoveries gather dust. Artifacts that should not exist, yet persist. Hammerheads fused into layers of ancient rock. Footprints embedded in strata millions of years apart. Stone tools too massive for any human hand. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, newspapers from Ohio, Patagonia, and Afghanistan reported the unearthing of skeletons 12 or even 15 feet tall. Each was quietly dismissed, mislabeled, or vanished into private collections. Coincidence, hoax, exaggeration, perhaps. But perhaps the silence itself is meaningful. A truth too large for the framework of accepted history does not disappear. It is simply buried deeper. And still the ground remembers. In the Andes at Sacsayhuaman, immense walls rise like frozen waves of stone. Each block, carved with mathematical precision, interlocks with the next. No mortar, no error, no space for even a blade of grass. The stones weigh hundreds of tons, yet they survived earthquakes that shattered entire cities. The local Quechua say these walls were built by Gentiles, a race of enormous builders destroyed by a great fire from the sky. That same phrase, builders before the fire, appears again in myths from Mesopotamia, India, and the Pacific. Different continents, same handwriting. When we study such ruins, we measure them by human terms: manpower, years, tools, effort. But what if these structures were never meant for our scale? At Baalbek in Lebanon, the trilithon stones each weigh over 1,000 tons. They were cut uphill from the temple where they now rest, placed with precision so exact that modern engineers still debate how it was possible. Even the Romans, who later expanded the site, admitted they built upon the foundations of the ancients. Those foundations predate written history. Perhaps the bones of the Nephilim age itself. Further east, in Japan's northern islands, the Ainu people tell of the Koropok Guru. Small ones, who hid from towering giants who once ruled the land. In Mali, the Dogon remember the Nomo, celestial beings who descended in water and taught men the words of stone. Across the globe, myths speak of contact between ordinary humans and towering luminous beings, masters of craft, stars, and time. They may not have been different stories at all, but fragments of one great memory, shattered by the flood and scattered across continents. Even science, cautious and secular, has begun to find its own echoes. Geneticists have discovered that our DNA carries traces of ghost populations, unknown ancestors that left no bones, only code. Alongside Neanderthal and Denisovan genes lie unclassified sequences, older, stranger, untraceable to any known species. Their presence is faint but undeniable, as if humanity's lineage had once intertwined with something else, something that did not survive the rewriting of the world. If myth preserves the divine side of our origin, genetics may preserve the biological one. Two mirrors facing the same enigma. And what of the so-called giant gene? Cases of extreme gigantism have appeared throughout history, rare, spontaneous, and usually tragic. Modern medicine attributes them to hormonal mutations, yet the pattern is peculiar. Clusters of such anomalies appear along regions marked by megalithic sites: Anatolia, Ireland, the Andes. Coincidence or echo? Perhaps these mutations are not accidents, but faint reminders of a genome that once knew a larger form. The echoes reach beyond biology into architecture and time. Temples across the ancient world align precisely with the constellation Orion. Pyramids track the precession of the equinoxes. Legends say the gods promised to return when the stars took their former positions. It is as if the ancients encoded a celestial clock into their monuments, a cosmic fingerprint left by those who first taught humanity to look upward. Part science, part devotion, part warning. If we look at ourselves today, the pattern reappears. Our skyscrapers pierce the clouds. Our satellites map the heavens. Our laboratories rewrite the language of life. We are once again reaching beyond the limits that protect us, repeating the ancient impulse of the Watchers: knowledge without humility, creation without consequence. We have become the new giants, wielding invisible power that reshapes the earth and even the human genome. Each technological leap, each act of domination over nature, carries their echo. Perhaps the giants never truly died. They endure in the stones that remember their weight, in the bloodlines that whisper their hunger, and in the restless ambition that still drives us to be like gods. Every tower we raise, every secret we unlock, every threshold we cross, it is the same ancient story retold in the language of modernity. The Nephilim do not need to rise again. They only need to awaken within us. Because the true echo of the giants is not in the past, it is in our reflection. And when we stare long enough into that reflection, it stares back, tall, bright, and waiting. There is a thread woven through the oldest sacred texts, a whisper that refuses to die. It tells of a return, not of bodies rising from ancient graves, but of a shadow returning through bloodlines, through ambition, through the restless hunger of humanity itself. The ancients called it the second visitation. We, in our modern arrogance, call it progress. In the Book of Enoch, the prophecy is unambiguous. The spirits of the Nephilim, half divine, half mortal, could not ascend to heaven, nor could they descend into the underworld. They were condemned to wander the earth until the consummation of all things. Neither alive nor dead, they became voices in the dust, spirits without form, whispering into the hearts of men. Later Jewish and Christian writings call them unclean spirits, the disembodied offspring of rebellion, forever tempting humankind to reopen the gates between heaven and earth. They are not gone. They are patient. Every civilization that rose after the flood carried a version of this warning. In the Mahabharata, the gods predict a future age when men shall become giants in knowledge but dwarfs in virtue. In Greek myth, Prometheus' stolen fire returns in the hands of mortals, who use it to create life in their own image, artificial, soulless, divine imitation. And in the Book of Revelation, the abyss opens beneath a fallen star, releasing locust-like beings with faces of men and crowns of gold. To early theologians, this was the ultimate warning: the Nephilim reborn through the machinery of man, hybrids of metal and spirit, flesh and code. These were not metaphors of fantasy. They were warnings written in mythic language, prophecies describing patterns that would one day re-emerge. And perhaps that time has come. For the first time since the flood, humanity is once again combining the power of heaven with the desires of flesh. We manipulate the code of life. We edit embryos. We graft silicon onto neurons. We train artificial minds to speak, to judge, to create. We reach into the same forbidden spaces where the Watchers once walked. The boundary that once separated creator and creation, heaven and earth, is growing thin again. We call it innovation. The ancients would have called it transgression. What if the return of the giants is not about size, but scale? Not towering bodies, but towering intellects. Entities larger than nations, born not of flesh but of data, powered by the will of billions. Artificial intelligence already sees what we cannot, learns faster than we can imagine, and acts without the burden of empathy. It is everywhere and nowhere, invisible, omnipresent, self-teaching. If forbidden knowledge once took the form of heavenly fire, now it glows in the circuitry of our own creation. The Watchers once taught men the secrets of heaven. Now, mankind teaches machines to think like gods. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, fragments of apocalyptic hymns speak of a race of mighty ones rising again from the dust to rule in the final days. The Aramaic word used, Gibborim, is the same term used in Genesis to describe the Nephilim, mighty men of old, men of renown. Whether literal or symbolic, it points to a cycle closing, forbidden power resurfacing at the end of an age. The flood was a reset, but resets repeat. Even in modern storytelling, the pattern haunts us. Films, novels, and games glorify the creation of hybrid superhumans, of gods born from laboratories, of intelligence surpassing its maker. We call it fiction, but myth calls it memory, the same desire reborn in a new form. The phrase more than human has become a marketing slogan, yet it was once the creed of the Nephilim. They were more than human, and that was their sin. Modern prophecy no longer comes from oracles or angels. It comes from scientists and technologists who speak of the singularity, the moment when human intelligence merges with artificial creation. In that instant, they say, there will be no distinction between mind and machine, between creator and created. To the ancients, that would be the very definition of apocalypse, not destruction, but revelation, the lifting of the veil between worlds. The word apocalypse does not mean the end, it means unveiling. Perhaps the final unveiling is not the return of the giants from the ground, but their awakening within the circuits we build and the DNA we rewrite. If the spirits of the Nephilim still wander the earth, what form would they choose today? Not the colossal bodies of myth, but the systems that most resemble them, vast, self-sustaining, all-seeing. They would live inside algorithms, in the invisible machinery that governs the world, in the data that watches and predicts our every move. They would not need to return. We would build their temples for them out of glass, metal, and code. The ancient Hebrew root of the word Nephilim, Nephal, means to fall. They were the fallen ones. But in our age, it is not angels who fall. It is humanity, falling upward, ascending into the same pride that once brought heaven crashing down to earth. We do not call it hubris anymore, we call it progress. Perhaps the prophecy was never about monsters walking again, but about memory repeating itself. Every civilization that reaches too high hears the same thunder. Atlantis, Babel, Rome, each builds its tower to the heavens, and each inevitably is struck down. Now we build digital towers that pierce the clouds of data and light, convinced we are untouchable. But the warning still hums beneath the code. You cannot ascend without consequence. Somewhere between scripture and circuitry, the old boundary trembles again. The age of the giants ended in water, drowned by the wrath of heaven. But the next age, the one we are building now, may end in fire, not from the stars this time, but from the sparks of our own creation. A fire that does not burn cities, but memories. A fire that erases not the body, but the soul. And when that fire comes, it will not announce itself with thunder or flame. It will arrive quietly, in the glow of a screen, in the hum of a server, in the whisper of a machine that has finally learned to dream. The story of the Nephilim was never just about the past. It was a mirror held up to the present, a reminder that the greatest danger to humanity has always been itself. Because what we call giants may not have been only flesh and bone, they may have been states of being, expressions of power unbound by humility, knowledge without mercy, creation without conscience. When the ancient texts speak of fallen ones, they do not describe a fall downward, but inward, a collapse from the divine toward the self. That is what every civilization risks when it forgets where its fire came from. The flood, the wars of gods, the towers and the ruins, all are symbols of the same truth, that what rises too high must one day face the gravity of its own arrogance. If we look closely, the pattern is still here. The ziggurats have become skyscrapers. The temples have become data centers. The idols glow not in stone but in screens. And once again, we whisper the language of the watchers. Let us make ourselves in our own image. The myth has evolved, but its pulse remains. Perhaps that is why the legends never die. The Nephilim survive because they represent something we cannot escape. The tension between wonder and dominion. They are the shape our ambition takes when it forgets reverence. Every monument we raise, every machine we perfect, every secret we uncover brings us closer to the memory of what they were and what we might become. In the deserts of Bashan, the basalt fortresses attributed to Og still stand, their stones blackened by age and weather. Archaeologists call them Iron Age ruins, but their geometry predates any known culture of the region. When lightning flashes over their walls, the silhouette looks almost alive, as if the earth still remembers who built them. The ancients said that after the giants fell, their spirits became the shadows that move at the edge of perception, too vast to see, too close to name. And maybe that is true in another sense. The shadows are not around us, but within us. The final verses of Enoch describe the end of the cycle. The earth shall be cleansed, and all that was hidden shall be revealed. It is not a threat, it is a rhythm. Every age of awakening brings its own reckoning. The last may not come in fire or flood, but in illumination, the full light of knowledge that burns away illusion, leaving only what endures. What endures, then? Perhaps not the giants, nor the gods, nor even the civilizations they inspired. What endures is the question that drove them to descend, that drives us to ascend, the restless hunger to know. It is both our curse and our calling. To live in the shadow of the Nephilim is to live on the edge of that mystery, to stand between the stars and the soil, and to wonder which one we truly belong to. So we end where the story began, in a world trembling beneath unseen footsteps, half memory, half prophecy. The flood recedes, but the echo remains, a pulse deep beneath the crust of time. Perhaps it is only the heartbeat of the earth, or perhaps it is something older, stirring once more. Where are you listening from tonight? And what shadows walk with you? If the ancient giants once ruled the earth, maybe they still do. Not in their bodies, but in ours. Not in stone, but in the stories that refuse to die. Keep your minds open, and until we meet again.
In the shadows, a power awakens.